My stepfather sold my childhood home while I was away. You don't need it anymore, he said with a shrug. My mom stayed quiet, so I just smiled, sent an email, and walked away. 3 days later, he started calling me non-stop, pleading for my attention. I never expected to be writing this, but here I am. This all happened last week, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. A bit of background. My dad passed away 5 years ago, leaving our family house to my mum and me equally. It's not luxurious, just a simple 3-bedroom, ranch-style home with a big basement where Dad had his woodworking shop. I spent many weekends there learning to create things with my hands. My mum remarried 3 years ago to Dante, who has always wanted to upgrade their lifestyle, whatever that means. Our house isn't in a fancy neighborhood. It's in a nice middle-class area where families have lived for years. Mrs. Rodriguez, next door, has been giving us tamales every Christmas since I was 10, and Mr. Chen across the street still uses Dad's old workbench that we gave him. Since Dad died, I've been paying half the property taxes and maintenance. It wasn't much, but it was my way of keeping his memory alive. I visited on weekends to fix things, work on projects in the shop, or just hang out with my mum. My sister Jasmine sometimes joined when she wasn't busy with college. Last week, I was away for work, just some meetings in Chicago. I texted my mom daily, but her replies were shorter than usual. I figured she was busy with her book club or something. When I returned yesterday, I saw a moving truck parked outside. At first, I thought Mom was finally getting rid of some old furniture she wanted to declutter. But then I spotted the sold sign in the yard. Walking inside felt surreal. There were strangers in our living room measuring windows for curtains, and Dante was showing them around like he was a home improvement show host. My mom sat at the kitchen table, staring into her coffee, as if it held all the answers. "Oh, hey," Dante said, acting as if everything was normal. "Didn't expect you back so soon. We're just finishing up some details with the buyers." I stood there stunned. "What buyers?" "We got a great offer," he shrugged, still playing realtor. "The market's hot right now. You don't need this place anymore, right? You've got your own apartment." My own place is a small 1-bedroom because I've been saving to eventually buy out my mom's share of the house. Something I've mentioned multiple times. I looked at my mom, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. "They already took everything from the workshop," Dante interrupted. "Donated it to Habitat for Humanity. They picked it up yesterday." Good cause, right? That workshop had all of Dad's tools he collected over 30 years. The workbench where he taught me to build my first birdhouse and the lathe he used to make. Mom's favorite rolling pin, all gone. I walked down to the basement, which was empty, just concrete floors and bare walls where pegboards used to hang. Dad's old radio still sat in the corner, covered in sawdust. They hadn't donated that yet. I guess they thought it was too old to be worth anything. I picked it up, tucked it under my arm, and walked back upstairs. Mom finally looked at me. "Seth, honey," she began. "It's fine," I said, and oddly enough, I meant it because everything suddenly felt clear. I smiled, really smiled, and walked out. I grabbed my phone in the driveway and sent an email. I'd been saving as a draft for months, not even looking back to see if they were watching from the window. My sister called an hour later. "You have to do something about this," she said. "Already done," I replied, plugging in Dad's old radio on my kitchen counter. "Just wait. Dante's been calling non-stop since this morning, and I'm letting his calls go to voicemail. Each message sounds more desperate than the last." Mom texted asking what the email was about, and I haven't replied yet. They have no idea what they just set in motion. Update 1. Thanks for all the support and advice. A lot has happened in the last 48 hours, so buckle up. Remember that email I mentioned? It was to our family lawyer. Not for legal action, just documentation. I've been keeping receipts for every property tax payment, maintenance bill, and repair cost for the last 5 years. But that's not all. The morning after my last post, I woke up to 12 missed calls from Dante and a bunch of texts from Mom saying we needed to talk as a family. Sure, now they want to talk. I took my time responding, had my coffee, and watched some YouTube videos about deck restoration. More on that later. Around noon, Dante showed up at my apartment unannounced. I could see him pacing outside through my Ring camera, running his hands through his hair like he always does when he's stressed. I let him stew for about 10 minutes before opening the door. "The sale can't go through," he blurted out before I could even greet him. The title company called, and they said there's a problem with the paperwork. I leaned against the doorframe. "Cut the act," he snapped. "What did you do?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the property deed. Joint ownership, clear as day. His face turned pale so fast it was almost funny. "You can't sell a house without all owners signing off," I said. "Basic real estate stuff. Aren't you supposed to know that?" He started yelling about how I was ruining everything, how he had plans, how the buyers were threatening to back out. I just kept scrolling through TikTok while he ranted. Finally, he stopped to catch his breath. "You done?" I asked, because we should probably discuss the tools he donated without my permission. "Those were mine too." That's when Mom called. Perfect timing. I put her on speaker. "Seth, please," she said. "Just come to dinner tonight. We can work this out." Dante jumped in. "Your mother's upset. Is that what you want?" "Actually," I said, "I think a family dinner is a great idea. Jasmine should come too." 6 p.m. Mom sounded relieved, while Dante looked suspicious. I spent the afternoon setting up Dad's old radio in my kitchen. I got it working perfectly. It still had that slight static on AM stations that Dad could never quite fix. It felt right, having his presence there, while I prepared for dinner. At 6 p.m, I brought a bottle of the cheap wine Mum likes and Dad's old photo album. Jasmine was already there, sitting at the kitchen counter and texting furiously. She looked up when I walked in, trying not to smile. Dinner was Mum's meatloaf, her go-to peace offering. The tension was thick enough to cut with the fancy serving knife Dante always brags about, the one Dad actually made. We ate in silence for about 10 minutes before Dante cleared his throat. "Look," he started, using his reasonable voice, "we can figure out some kind of compensation for your share." I cut him off. "How's the real estate business lately, Dante?" He blinked. "What? It must be tough. The market's crazy right now. Lots of competition." I took a bite of meatloaf. "Bet your commission from this sale would be helpful." His fork clattered against the plate. Mom froze mid-bite, and Jasmine suddenly became very interested in her phone. "What are you talking about?" Dante's voice had an edge now. I pulled out a folder and started laying out papers on the table, right next to the green beans. Property tax receipts, maintenance records, bank statements, 5 years of documentation showing I've been paying half the costs on this house, plus some interesting emails from your broker about your recent performance issues. "You had no right," he shouted. "Indoor voice," Jasmine cut in, not looking up from her phone. "The neighbors might hear that." "Right, the same neighbors who've known our family for decades. The same neighbors who've been calling him about the sale." Mom finally spoke up. "Seth, what are you planning?" I stood up, grabbed my jacket. "You know what Dad always said about woodworking? Measure twice, cut once. I've been measuring for 5 years. Dante's phone buzzed, and his expression changed as he read the message. Then my phone buzzed, along with Jasmine's and Mom's. "What did you do?" Dante whispered. "Check your email," I said, walking out. The HOA board just called an emergency meeting. Action Update 2. The HOA. Emergency meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. at the community center. I got there early, watching people file in through the glass doors. Dante showed up last, phone glued to his ear, looking like he hadn't slept. "Remember Mrs. Rodriguez? She's on the HOA board, as is Mr. Chen and Mr. Patterson, whose daughter I helped with her science fair project last year. Funny how connections work in small neighborhoods. Here's what Dante didn't know. Over the last 5 years, I'd been quietly buying properties in our neighborhood through an LLC, not anything fancy, just the rental houses that became available. A duplex here, a small house there. Property values were low enough that I could manage it with careful planning and my savings. By last count, I owned about 70% of the rental properties in the area. Guess who that makes the majority stakeholder in the HOA? The meeting started with Mrs. Rodriguez calling for order. Dante sat at the back, still trying to look important. Mum wasn't there. Jasmine had taken her out for coffee, away from the drama. Smart kid. "First agenda item," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, reading from her iPad. "The proposed sale of 1427 Oak Street. That's our house. Was our house." I stood up. "About that," I said, "I'd like to propose some changes to the HOA bylaws." Dante's head snapped up. "You can't." Article 7, Section 3, I cut him off. "Any property sale must be approved by the board if it involves structural changes." The buyers mentioned renovations. Mr. Chen nodded. "They want to add a second story. The plans would alter the neighborhood's historical character." "That's ridiculous." Dante jumped up, face red. "You can't block a sale over—" "Sit down," Mr. Patterson said quietly, "or we'll discuss your expired realtor's license." "Yeah, I found out about that too." Dante had let it lapse 3 months ago too, busy trying to make quick sales to handle the paperwork. He'd been operating without it since then. Not exactly legal. The color drained from his face and he sat down. I walked to the front of the room, pulled up the neighborhood map on the projector, and started pointing out properties, all the ones I'd acquired, all the improvements we'd made. The community garden we started last spring, the weekend workshops we'd been running for local kids, the tool-sharing program that saved everyone money on home repairs. "This isn't just a neighborhood," I said. It's a community, one my dad helped build, and I'm not letting anyone tear that down. Mrs. Rodriguez was smiling, Mr. Chen was nodding, and even the newer residents looked interested. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. Mom's ready to talk. She's crying, the good kind. I wrapped up the meeting quickly after that. The sale was officially blocked by the HOA board. Dante stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. As people left, Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed my arm. Your father would be proud, she said in Spanish. He always said you were the smart one. I found Mum and Jasmine at the diner where Dad used to take us for Sunday breakfast. Mum's eyes were red, but she looked more alive than I'd seen her in years. I'm leaving him, she said before I could sit down. Should have done it months ago. Years ago, Jasmine corrected, stirring her coffee. Mum reached across the table and grabbed my hand. The workshop tools, I saved some of the important ones. They're in Mrs. Rodriguez's garage. I squeezed her hand. I know, she told me. I told you last week. Of course she did. Mom laughed, then started crying again. I'm so sorry, Seth. I got lost somewhere along the way. We'll find you again, I said. My phone was blowing up. Dante leaving angry voicemails. The buyer's agent demanding explanations. Neighbors sending supportive messages. I turned it off. So what happens now? Jasmine asked. I looked around the diner at the same cracked leather booths, the same flickering neon sign, the same coffee Dad said tasted like motor oil, but drank anyway. Some things shouldn't change, I said. Now we rebuild, starting with the workshop. Mom wiped her eyes. The house, can we still live there? Better. I pulled out my phone and showed them the LLC paperwork. You're both shareholders now, 25% each. I keep 51% to maintain control of the HOA stuff. We can make decisions together, like Dad would have wanted. Jasmine's eyes widened. You made us part owners of everything. Family business? I shrugged. I had the paperwork ready for months. I just needed the right moment. That's when Dante burst into the diner looking wild. You think you've won? I'll sue. I stood up slowly. Explain to a judge how you tried to sell property you didn't fully own. Or how you've been working without a license. Or should we talk about the creative accounting in your last 3 deals? He deflated like a balloon. Get out of our neighborhood, I said quietly. You don't belong here. He left, and Mum started laughing. A real laugh, like when Dad used to tell his terrible jokes. Jasmine joined in, and soon we were all laughing. Probably looking crazy to the other customers, but who cared? The diner owner brought over a slice of apple pie on the house. He said, your dad's favorite. Final update. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. A lot has happened, and not all of it was pretty. But we're finally on the other side of this mess. First off, Dante didn't go quietly. The morning after the diner confrontation, he showed up at the house at 6 a.m., completely unhinged, throwing my mom's garden gnomes at the windows. Real mature. Mr. Chen caught it all on his security camera and sent me the footage. While I was driving over, I found Mom on the front porch, screaming right back at him. While Jasmine was on the phone with the police, the whole neighborhood was outside watching, some still in pajamas. Others recording everything on their phones. Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson was live streaming it on TikTok. You think you're so smart? Dante yelled, waving around some papers. I found the loophole in your precious HOA bylaws. Article 12? I cut in, walking up the driveway. I wrote those bylaws revisions myself last year. There are no loopholes. He lunged at me, actually lunged like a bad movie villain. I sidestepped, and he face-planted into Mom's prized hydrangeas. The crowd gasped. Someone laughed. I heard the distinct sound of TikTok comments rolling in. Get up, I said. You're embarrassing yourself. He scrambled up, dirt and petals in his hair. This isn't over. I've got friends in the city council. Had friends, Mum interrupted. I called Karen last night, your golf buddy's wife. Told her everything. She was very interested in how you've been handling property sales lately. Dante's face went from red to grey. Karen's the city clerk who manages all the property records. And she makes the best potato salad at the summer block party, probably why. Dante forgot she existed while plotting against us. Face it, Jasmine chimed in. You lost. Now get off our property before the police show up and this goes viral. Well, more viral. She pointed at the growing crowd of phone-wielding neighbors. That's when Dante made his final mistake. He rushed at Mom but didn't get within 3 feet of her. Mr. Patterson, the former high school wrestling coach, had him in a hold before anyone could blink. Dante squealed like a stuck pig, dropping his papers everywhere. The police arrived to find our stepdad pinned to the ground by a 65-year-old man, while the entire neighborhood filmed it, not his proudest moment. They took him away in the squad car. but not before he started screaming about lawsuits and revenge through the window while Mrs. Rodriguez's grandson provided running commentary on his live stream. After the chaos, the real work began. Mum filed for divorce that afternoon, and the workshop tools came out of hiding. Turns out nearly everyone on the block had been storing pieces for us. Mr. Chen had Dad's lathe in his garage. The Pattersons kept the hand planes in their attic. And even old Mr. Wilson, who never leaves his house, had been guarding Dad's favorite workbench in his basement. We spent the weekend putting the workshop back together. The whole neighborhood helped. Kids ran extension cords, teenagers organized tools, and adults installed new shelving. Someone ordered pizza, and Mrs. Rodriguez brought tamales while Mr. Chen's wife made her famous dumplings. "Your dad would have loved this," Mom said, watching everyone work. She was smiling, really smiling for the first time in years. He always said a home is only as strong as its foundation. Speaking of foundation, Jasmine called from the basement stairs. We found something behind the old water heater. Tucked into the wall was a time capsule with Dad's handwriting on the lid. For when you need it most. Inside was his old project notebook filled with sketches, plans, notes about the house, the neighborhood, and a letter dated just before he passed. "To my family, a house is more than walls and a roof. It's the stories we build together, the memories we share, the community we create. Take care of each other, take care of our neighbors, and never let anyone tell you what your home is worth. Love, Dad." P.S. Seth, check behind the workbench. Behind the workbench was a hidden compartment containing Dad's prized antique, handsaw, and a stack of property deeds. He'd been buying up neighborhood properties long before I started. Like father, like son. We're turning the front room into a community workshop space. Free classes for neighborhood kids start next month. Jasmine's moving in to help run them. And Mom's planting a garden around the whole house. She says she needs a project to keep her busy during the divorce. As for Dante, last we heard, he's staying at a motel outside town. His real estate buddies won't touch him now. Turns out reputation matters in small communities, and the viral videos probably didn't help either. The house isn't just ours anymore. It belongs to everyone who helped save it. That's what Dad would have wanted. Edit. Just got word that Dante is moving 3 states away. I guess he finally got the message. The workshop's first project, building a new sign for the community garden. Dad would have appreciated the irony.